You were listening to the Marc Patrone radio program. If you'd like to call, here's the number. 416-640-0200. That's 416-640-0200. The Marc Patrone radio program, heard exclusively on News Talk, Saga 960.
And we're back with more News Talk, so very glad you could join us on this Friday edition of the show, right here on Saga 960. Well, I don't know how it is, but CNN has figured out that COVID will only spread at Trump rallies, but will not spread in BLM, Black Lives Matter protests. You know what? And it reminds me of something that happens. It's an interesting phenomenon. You'll see people gathered at a news conference. Miles Kristen joins us, by the way, from near Madison, Wisconsin. Miles, maybe you've seen this. So you'll have, say, 4 people gathered behind the microphone. They'll all be physical distancing. They'll all be wearing microphones. One of them will step towards the microphone, and even though there's people around, they'll take their mask off so that they can be heard. And I think it's because microphones kill the COVID-19 virus. I don't know what you think about this possibility here, but so rather than having a mask on, maybe I can walk around, just have a microphone in front of my face, because as soon as I become immune to either.
This is going to be way out of left field, but actually that kind of reminds me of when they supposedly found the passport of one of the 9/11 hijackers amongst the rubble in New York City. It's like, oh, okay, so the planes just, evaporated, all this stuff evaporated, but a passport survived perfectly.
Yeah,
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that. No other details were given, but the discovery prompted the FBI and police to expand the search area down in Lower Manhattan.
That reminds me of the magic bullet on the back seat.
The magic bullet theory that shot
pristine.
Kennedy, for those who don't know, and shot multiple other people in the vehicle.
Exactly. It hit like it stopped in midair at one point, did a U-turn, or did a
U-turn,
90.
Stopped at a 7-Eleven, had a big gulp. And
the killer was just discovering this pristine bullet right there. There you go. There's proof that it was fired from the Texas School Book Depository.
Now, if we're going to talk about the hilariousness of there's really nothing funny about COVID, but what we go and say, okay, shame on these people, but not these people for the way they act when in regards to COVID. I mean, yeah, you're right, and. I don't think people should be having indoor rallies. I personally don't think people should be having rallies. But, yeah, if you can have a rally, do it outside. I think we've come to see that being outside's a little safer in regards to all this stuff. But, in Madison especially, it's like every time a group of Christians or conservatives get together, it's like, oh, shame on them. Oh, but these Black Lives Matter protesters are having a cookout, at the Capitol Square or outside of a government building or at the mall. And it's like, okay, food service is a very difficult thing, and they're all, doing more regulations on food service. And yet, a bunch of people who have no license to do that in the first place are like, oh, we're going to have a cookout, or, oh, we have protests with a few thousand people. Let's all get pizzas. And people are so dumb when it comes to some of this stuff.
But finally, Nancy Pelosi, I guess, has come out and said something about, this is violence. We don't approve of violence. But I want to hear Let's hear CNN talk about this. It was a panel discussion about COVID.
Tuesday, the Trump campaign communications director, Tim Murtaugh, talking about the impact of indoor rallies on the spread of COVID versus outdoor protests for the Black Lives Matter movement. Just listen to this from Mr. Murtaugh.
If people can protest in the streets by the tens of thousands, if people can riot, if people can gamble in casinos, then certainly they can gather peacefully under the First Amendment to hear from the President of the United States.
I hear the casino point, but to the protests outside versus indoor rallies, what is your take?
I think it's important for us to, as public health experts, to lead with the science. And the science tells us that this is a virus that does not discriminate. It doesn't care why it is that people are gathering, but it does care about the conditions under which they're gathering. So outdoors, much safer than indoors. Wearing masks, obviously much safer than not wearing masks. And I also, in this case, would distinguish between the behavior of the participants while at protests versus rallies. At protests, many people are aware of the risks and are doing everything they can to reduce that risk, versus at many of these rallies we're seeing people going.
Do you believe that? Yeah, it's those people, those rioters throwing bricks at cops. You know, they're being sensitive about the possible spread of COVID.
You know, if you got 10,000 people and 5,000 of them are wearing masks, but of the 5,000 wearing masks, they're having it on their chin most of the time, not covering their face, and they're all taking the mask off to, you know, scream and chant into megaphones. I mean, chanting is really not a good idea right now, right? Because, like, you're yelling, you're screaming, you're putting saliva into the air. And, listen, I've spent many, many, many years on megaphones and doing chants and all this stuff. And, you know, I've come to realize that with the complex issues that we face in this world, a 3-syllable chant is not going to fix that. And every party is guilty of it. You talk to a libertarian, they go, taxation is theft. Well, it's a lot more difficult than that. You know, conservatives love to yell the build the wall stuff, you know, and immigration's more complex than that. And then you've got now BLM people, you know, saying, defund the police. And it's like, the funding of police issue is much more complicated. If you defund the police, you're just going to probably increase civil asset forfeiture, and cops are probably going to, find other ways of getting the funding they need. It's like if we defunded the CIA tomorrow, do you think the CIA would still have some sources of income? I can probably think of a few, you know, and complex issues need, you know, real solutions, not just chants.
Miles Kristen joining us from nearby Madison, Wisconsin. So, you're predicting that the Biden ticket, is it Harris-Biden now? I'm not sure. I think it's Harris. It's not Biden-Harris. She's actually wearing the pants in that relationship. But let me ask you this. You think that Florida is going to go Democrat? Is that because COVID has killed off so many Trump supporters, elderly ones?
I'm gonna not answer that particular phrase in the question, but I don't know. I don't know on that particular part. The fact that COVID has been really, really bad in Florida will probably play a factor. The fact that the Parkland shooting happened there, and I'm sure that the Democrats have used that tragedy as a political tool ever since it happened. I mean, you probably have, you know, quote-unquote nonpartisan groups who are basically advocating for the Democrats, who have probably used school shootings and there have been other horrible shootings down there, and they've probably been advocating for left-leaning politicians from ever since those sorts of things happened. So you have the shootings, you have the COVID, and then keep in mind, Obama won Florida in 2008. I believe he may have lost it in 2012. I know Obama lost some of the states in 2012 that he had won in 2008, and he was actually one of the only presidents to actually be reelected with less votes and less electoral votes. But you got Bloomberg now throwing $100 million into that state. Now, then again, Bloomberg says he's going to do something, doesn't necessarily always do it. He said he was going to pay all those staffers up and through beyond his own campaign, and he's not necessarily doing that now. But $100 million, even if he throws in $80 million, that's still a lot of money. So I think they could flip Florida. But, you know, if you don't get Pennsylvania or, you know, a handful of other states, Trump still wins. Let's hear Biden yesterday at the CNN town hall. Let's hear what he had to say.
If the president had done his job from the beginning, all the people would still be alive. All the people, I'm not making this up, just look at the data. Look at the data. And then we're now being told there's going to be I pray to God there's a vaccine tomorrow that could be available to everyone. First of all, once a vaccine is made available, and you know this well, once it's made available, it's going to be...
All right, so there you go. If Trump had done his job, nobody would have died of COVID in the United States.
I mean, that's of course, people would have still died from it. What percentage, what numbers? I mean, I think Trump had major failings, but I also think that this is a problem bigger than just Trump or, the politicians or, either party. I mean, if the Democrats had been in, they would have screwed up too. They probably just would have screwed up in a different way. And there's so many things that could have been done from the beginning of this. I mean, I'm not one necessarily for restrictions and so forth, but, there could have been some restrictions on your cruise ships. And, really the universities had a responsibility to tell their students that if you screw up and you do stupid, irresponsible stuff, like, the kids in Kentucky or whatever that had the quote-unquote COVID party, and then hundreds of them got sick, and these flats and sororities, like, universities should have told their people, if you're acting irresponsible, you can be kicked out of school. And employers should have done more. I have said this all along, that the insurance companies in the United States could have done a lot more to advise people about being responsible and what policies they want to see from, their customers and so forth, especially in regards to companies, and the travel between, say, a place like Wisconsin and Illinois. I mean, there's so much more that could have been done, and it's strange because you think 10, 15 years ago they were writing out scenarios, especially after 9/11 when we had the anthrax issue. I mean, we had all this stuff on the books about what to do in a serious situation, and you had Trump do what he did. You had a lot of Republicans follow suit, and you had a lot of state Democrats who didn't want to do anything. There's so much that wasn't done by politicians because they answer to this corporation and this lobbying group and this lobbying group, and it's a huge failure far beyond just Trump.
I want to ask you about the shadowy influence of the Soros group, the financier who has widely been seen as the guy who has bankrolled some of these protest movements in the United States that have been so destructive. There was some discussion on it on Fox News, and things got kind of uncomfortable where panel members didn't want to talk about it. Newt Gingrich was on there, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Let's hear a little bit of that exchange.
Pro-criminal and overwhelmingly elected with George Soros's money, and they're a major cause of the violence we're seeing because they keep putting the violent criminals back on the street.
I'm not sure we need to bring George Soros into this.
I was going to say you get the last word, Speaker.
He paid for it. I mean, why can't we discuss the fact that...
All right. Well,
don't mind the man behind the curtain.
I agree with Melissa. George Soros doesn't need to be a part of this conversation.
Nobody wanted to talk. Okay. That's Marie Harf, who's a former spokesperson for Obama. So Harris Faulkner, the host, didn't want to talk about him, and Marie Harf didn't want to talk about it. We don't have to bring him into the conversation. Why not? I guess that's the name that cannot be spoken in the United States, at least not on Fox.
That's hilarious. I mean, especially with Fox, and he's one of many, and that's the thing too, is you think about, people would always go on and on about the Koch brothers, and it's like, the Koch brothers are just the two guys you've heard of. There's probably 100 other guys with that kind of money and power that nobody even knows about, and it's weird that you do have these people funding protesters in order to help the Democratic Party, and actually they're actually making the Democratic Party worse off. I mean, literally all the Democratic Party had to do to win this election was appear to be sane and rational. That's all they had to do, and they couldn't do that, and they still might win, but it's like all you had to do was just shut up and not do anything crazy, and then you basically supported rioters and even bailed out rioters, and you can't even make the distinction between, make the clear distinction between peaceful protests and things on fire. It shouldn't be that difficult.
And yet it is difficult. But finally, Nancy Pelosi, I mentioned this earlier, she finally said, well, you know, all this looting and stuff, we're not in favor of that.
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me? No, we lost you there.
Cut out.
Okay, you got me? Are you there, Miles? I think we lost Miles. I was going to play this clip anyway. Hopefully we'll get Miles back on the phone. But this is Nancy Pelosi talking about these protests. It's finally dawned on them that it's hurting their chances to get elected. Let's listen.
The leader spoke. The gentleman on the other side said, where are you when you're talking about violence, this or that? We're there. We support peaceful demonstrations. We participate in them. They are part of the essence of our democracy. That does not include looting, starting fires, or rioting. They should be prosecuted. That is lawlessness. I'm very proud that Joe Biden has presented the clarity of that.
Yeah. So it's finally dawned on the Democrats that looting is a bad thing, that lawlessness is a bad thing on the streets of so many cities in America, Miles Kristen. And so, what does this tell you? What it tells me is that they know that their support has been slipping amongst Americans who feel that safety is being compromised and that these protests are anything but peaceful.
Yeah, and I mean, if they lose Wisconsin again, I would definitely say that what happened in Kenosha is directly connected. I mean, between them winning the gubernatorial race in 2018 and a few other state races that year by a very small amount, and they have also won some, state Supreme Court races over the last few years, they had a real chance of winning Wisconsin, and they still might win Wisconsin. But if they lose Wisconsin, I would definitely blame it on the riots. And it's just, they didn't used to kowtow to crazy rioters. The Democrats they didn't kowtow to the crazy rioters so much 10 years ago or 15 years ago. They were pretty good about separating themselves from the far left. They would be like, "Oh no, I'm a capitalist," and it's like you're sucking up to crazy people in order to get a few thousand votes when you're going to lose hundreds of thousands of votes in the process. It's insane.
Absolutely. Miles, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Miles Kristen joining us. Check out Wisconsin International Radio, by the way. That's his platform that he posts content on. And you can also find him on Twitter as well, so follow him on Twitter. And lots more to come on News Talk. Well, our final scintillating segment of the week. How about that? It's coming your way after this.